And what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today we're talking about deloads, fatigue, and just in general how that coincides with each other alongside of a training block. So, as you can see here, I've drawn a nice little graph here. Now, what is this actually showing us? What is this? What are we talking about here? So, this graph in general symbolises a start of a training block, okay? So, as you can see, we've got a training block here, we've got start to end. And then as you can see, we've got progression on an upward scale here in red, and then we've got fatigue on an upward scale here as well in blue. So I don't know if you can see that, but it starts off low, goes to high, and then again with progression, starts off low and goes to high. Now this model in particular is best describing training performance. However, I do think there's a strong correlation between performance, right, and fat loss, okay? So depending on what phase you're in, they're kind of the same. So whether you're in your whether you're in a fat loss phase, progression in this sense will kind of act on a similar manner as it will do in a muscle building phase, for example. Obviously the two metrics that you'll be looking at there is fat loss for a fat loss phase, and muscle building will of course be progression, strength, that kind of thing. And then as you can see, we have fatigue, okay? So fatigue is essentially just stress, okay? Anything that you do, right, whether that be a calorie deficit, whether that be overloading your muscles in the gym, that is all external stress that you are putting on your body, okay? Now, as we can see at the very start of a training block, your fatigue is really low and your ability to progress is really high, okay? So as you see, we've started off on this training block, progression's going really well, progression's skyrocketing at a really good pace, and then once we get to this point here, this is like our peak progression, okay, or peak amount of fat loss or peak amount of performance, okay? Now, funnily enough, as we go alongside here, so at that peak point, fatigue also starts to kick up really fast. Fatigue is one of these things where we can do our best to mitigate stress as much as possible, whether that being getting plenty of sleep, reducing overall external stress in our lifestyles, having a good diet, other stress management strategies like meditation, mindfulness. All these kind of things are really good at mitigating signs of fatigue. But whether we like it or not, the more we progress in a training plan or the more we progress in any kind of goal, the more fatigue is going to get generated. We literally cannot get away from it. If we did, we'd be, superhumans that could bench 1,000 kilos and have 0% body fat, okay? Fatigue will build up and there's no getting around it, okay? So as you see, as we get along this training block, fatigue starts to build up pretty rapidly. As fatigue is building up, what that is going to do to your performance is it's going to actually negatively impact your performance, okay? So once we get to peak performance or peak progression, right, as fatigue starts to build up, your progression in general will start to dwindle and you will gradually start to stall in progression. So past this point here, this is where you might see things like a reduction in sleep quality, low motivation to train, maybe some old injuries and old niggles are starting to creep back in. And of course, as shown in the graph, a reduction in progression. Now, this is where deloading comes in, okay? Now, deloading is essentially a period of scheduled rest where we're trying to reduce all external fatigue and stress as much as possible. Now, of course, one way of reducing stress dramatically is by changing our training a wee bit. Now, what we can do is we can either take 5 to 7 days off training completely, where we're focusing purely on recovery, stretching, mobility, and so on. Or what we can do is we can still train, but cut all our volume and all of our intensity by at least 50%. So the way I like to program training usually is a higher intensity approach. So what we'll do is we'll cut all working sets down to one working set and potentially leave intensity alone. If a client still likes to train intense and train hard, still have them training, but just cut all the volume down by about 50%. So my favourite method of deloading is the first method, and that is to essentially just take the time to completely rest and recharge and take those 5 to 7 days off. That's because I feel this is a much more efficient way of fully getting rid of that fatigue that we've built up without being in the gym, and just that's because I feel this is the most efficient way of actually getting off all that stress and doing it as quickly and as efficiently as possible, right? And not to mention, it also gives us that kind of psychological break from the gym, because let's not forget, as fatigue gets higher and higher, and once we get to this point, your motivation and your mindset towards training is going to be very different to when you first started. So taking that time off, that gives us that time to miss the gym, so to speak, and fully get ourselves proper fired up and proper motivated to go back and start training again. So deloading is super crucial. If I haven't mentioned already, we would want to deload around this point in a training cycle when progression is pretty much near minimum and fatigue is really high. And like again, fatigue is really high, and we're starting to notice those unwanted signs. Again, reduced appetite, low motivation, injuries, near impossible to progress. All of that kind of thing is what we want to be looking out for. Now again, deloading is absolutely crucial to get rid of all that unwanted fatigue and to start fresh again from a training block. So in order to keep progressing and keep making progress, we need to be taking time off to allow the body to recover and essentially break through plateaus. So if you're watching this and you've been at that point where you're just not making any more progress and it feels almost impossible, then perhaps you're missing out on one of the most crucial aspects of training, which is recovery. Just a very quick one, guys, on progression, fatigue. Again, like I said at the start of this video, we can look at progression as whatever you're progressing towards, whether that be fat loss or muscle building.